Welcome, Bronco Nation, to a very exciting episode. I cannot tell you how excited I am to do this video today. We are going to be previewing the Boise State 2022 football season. This is part of the first part of my Boise State football season preview, and we're going to be going through the Boise State defense, specifically the front seven. And I did say I have a very special guest with us today. Old Times fans of Boise State will remember one of the greatest to play the position, Carl Keever, a Hall of Famer, Boise State Hall of Famer linebacker for Boise State, is here with me today to help preview this 2022 Boise State defense. For those who were not lucky enough to watch Carl Keever play, and unfortunately, 96 baby here, so I was not. For those of you who were not lucky enough to see him in person, this is a man who made an impact on the field. 397 career tackles, third all-time for Boise State. 24 tackles versus Idaho. That was his game high, and it's good for second most tackles in a game for Boise State. He is the only Boise State football player to average 100 to get 130 tackles all 3 seasons that he played. Only player. He was a 2-time AP first team, 3 times Big Sky All Conference, and he was Newcomer of the Year 1982. With me today is Carl Keever. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Anytime we can talk about the Broncos, it's a good day for me.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. We're going to go through this video series. It's going to be an awesome intro here. This is the first one, again, like I said, in the series. Also coming on, not in this video, but later on in the series, we're going to be having Ryan Dinwiddie, Tyler Rasa. I always mispronounce that last name. When he comes on, he'll tell me how to pronounce it. But Tyler Rasa, Dryzen James, Derek Schumann, and I'm trying to get a couple more special guests as well, but they're all going to be coming on and helping me preview the Boise State 2022 football season. Obviously, today, we couldn't start off with a better special guest, actually partially responsible in a way for the fact that I even had this channel in the first place. He was a big encourager of me when I started out writing my sports articles just on the Bronco Nation updates page. So I'm so excited to have Carl on today. We're going to start off with just a little bit of a Q&A, just talk about Carl Keever's playing days a little bit, his perspective on the Broncos, and then he will help me preview this Boise State defense. We're going to go through kind of a retrospective of the 2021 defense, the front seven, that is. We'll get the secondary in another video, but just talk about some of their stats, talk about some of the big headlines, some of the big players. We'll talk about the newcomers for the 2022 team, top starters for this defense coming into this season. Then we'll give 3 keys to the game, or 3 keys to the season for the Boise State defense, and then some predictions at the end. What's this defense going to do? What's the team going to do as a whole? And we're going to break all of that down for you. Going to be an awesome video throughout. I'm going to be adding in highlights as well. Players mentioned, defense overall. This is going to be a great video. So like I said, let's get off to the start. We got a lot to talk about. So Carl Keever, thank you so much again for coming on here. The first question I have, and you're a player that played back in the Boise State days before the blue. How do you feel about the blue turf? It's a big question up front.
I love it. You know, actually, the first year that we put the blue turf in with not the old blue turf, which was like the green turf. It was maybe a half an inch long, and it was on cement.
Oh my goodness.
So I was coaching at Boise High, and we had a Thursday game, and Boise State was playing Friday night with the new turf. They had just put in those rubber pellets on the turf. So we were the first game I ever played on that new turf.
Wow.
We had those black pellets everywhere, in our socks, in our underwear, in our shirts. Every time somebody would land on the field, it was like this black cloud went up in the air. But it was not, hardly anybody got hurt. That's why they went to that field. And
well, that makes sense. When the other version is cement with basically half an inch of carpet on top of it. I don't know how that ever was a design in the first place, but I'm glad we've gone to the nice soft. I'm sure the players appreciate it. Now, I will say I have played on some turf in my days. It is still not a soft surface. I don't know if anyone's ever been out on the blue and felt it. So definitely not the same as landing on grass and dirt, but better than that concrete stuff for sure.
Oh, yeah. And also back in the day, they used to spray paint the logos on the field. So if you fell on that logo with your skin not being protected, you would get like a road rash burn on your leg or your arms. And then having to take a shower after the game was like the most painful thing ever.
did you ever imagine that Boise State would get to where it is today? Obviously, you played before the FBS era, not just before the blue, but before the FBS, before the Fiesta Bowls, before any of that. Did you, playing back then, think, Boise State's going to be sitting in a place where they're on the national stage?
I don't think anybody that played when I played would have thought that the success that the program would have going forward would be so amazing. When that 1982 season, we were in the Big Sky Conference, 1AA, but we played 3 teams. We beat 3 teams that were Division I teams. We beat Utah State the week after they beat BYU, and BYU was ranked in the top 10 nationwide. And so, we just played whoever we played. We had great coaches. They taught unbelievable fundamentals, and they over and over again, that blue collar work ethic. And the coaches would sit us down, and not just about football, but about life. And, I had 2 really good linebacker coaches in Lyle Sentensich and Dan Brown. And Lyle, after Jim Kreiner went to Iowa State after the 82 season, Lyle became the head football coach, and Dan Brown then became my inside linebacker coach.
Now, that blue collar work ethic that we talk about, that's always been obviously what you hear about Boise State. I mean, all the Boise State jerseys that you buy, they have the little blue collar on the inside, because that's what it's all about for Boise State. It's not about necessarily getting the 5-star recruits, though we do get some good high quality recruits that come through Boise State. But it's not just about going out there and buying your products. It's about going out and finding men of character and building them up to play the right way. So that's something that you saw back in your playing days, and do you believe that's something that is still being portrayed here in Boise State coming forward?
Yes, especially with Coach Avalos as the head football coach. I've been to a couple practices, and the intensity of which the players play is a lot better than I've seen in a long time. And, like we've talked, you and I have talked, the key to success, especially on defense, is the intensity that you play the game and the physicality that you play the game. And you have to be smart. And, you might not be the fastest player, but if you do a lot of film work, study, and know the keys to your opponents, you have that half-second quicker reaction time, which makes up for the loss of maybe you're not as fast as the team you're playing. But that makes it faster by the work you put in off the field watching the film.
This Andy Avalos, what I love about him, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, is former player himself. You watch the tape on him, a guy who maybe wasn't the 5-star type of player. He actually was turned down by a couple Mountain West schools, Fresno State for one, who he has never lost to. And I think he carries that chip on his shoulder. But he was kind of one of those players who came in under-recruited and played big. And he has brought that level to Boise State in the way that the guys that he's recruiting. I think when you look at the class that was brought in, which, by the way, was an excellent class, you see a lot of local products on there. You see a lot of guys that weren't necessarily getting looks from other people, but he saw something in them. And I think when we start seeing these Andy Avalos classes coming in next couple of seasons, we are going to see Boise State returning to that old school style, those Bronco days, those Fiesta Bowl winning teams that didn't necessarily have all the 5-stars on the teams, but they had the guys that were willing to put in the work, that had the work ethic. And we're already seeing with Boise State the intensity pickup between 2020 and 2021. I have never seen guys out there headhunting the way that the Boise State defense. I saw multiple hits that were bigger than any hit I'd ever seen in a long time here for Boise State. We're going back to like the 2009, 2010 days before I've seen intensity as big as this is picking up at Boise State. So do you have a favorite moment in your playing days at Boise State?
Yeah, I actually do. It was 1982. We're playing. Our second to the last game was against Utah State, and I got hurt. I blew out my left ankle probably 10 plays into the game, and I had to have it operated on. But Utah State, like we had talked earlier, Utah State the week before had beaten BYU. and they came into our the varsity center when it was on the south side of the stadium, and we could hear them as they walked in, because we had just gotten off the field and we were in our locker room, and the visitors' locker room was next to ours, and we could hear them making fun of us and like they were going to destroy us. And it was just like, it was like they thought we were a College of Idaho, basically, as far as what we could do. John Rady played like the edge rusher for us. And in that game, John had 7 to 8 sacks in that game.
Oh my gosh.
But just the satisfaction of beating them after they, vocally trounced us. I mean, there was like, we were up 30-0 with about 3 minutes left in the game, and they kicked a field goal, and we were so upset because we wanted to shut them out. So, but it is what it is. But I wish I would have had the memory of beating the Vandals, but I lost to them all 3 years. I played at Boise State, and a lot of the guys that I played football with at Boise High played at University of Idaho. So to this day, they still remind me that I lost 3 times in a row to them.
Well, it's all Vandal fans have got right now. I mean, demoted from the FBS to the FCS and never haven't beaten Boise State in the modern era of college football. You got to give them something.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the Idaho Vandals, because this is actually the surprise question I told you I'd be bringing in. It's a very controversial one. I see it posted all the time, and it's pretty much 50-50 down the line to what fans think about it. Do you still wish that we played Idaho?
Yes, 100%. I would like to beat them 100-0 every single but for the community here, it would help all the businesses here and fill up the stadium. I guarantee you, if Idaho came here to play Boise State, we would set a record for the number of people in the stadium. All of the businesses around the university would be slammed with business. And I mean, great for the economy. It's great for the tradition. And you got Alabama, Auburn, you have Boise State, Idaho, Ohio State, Michigan. I mean, the fans love those games, and so do former players and current players.
I'm on the same side of you as that. I hadn't thought about the economic one. That's actually a really good perspective on that. It's not something that I'd considered. But as far as when you talk about in-state recruitment, when you talk about in-state pride, you have got to play your in-state rival, and it's not like it's a manufactured rivalry. This is a rivalry that goes back decades, and that unfortunately ended when Boise State, moved up and moved out of the same conference with them. And I'm with you on that. I would like to see them bring it back. I know people say, "Oh, well, Boise State's kind of moved past them. They would be good for strength of schedule." I don't think it's about that. I think it's about establishing the mentality and saying you own your state. Whether you say that by, like right now, Boise State, obviously they're the best school, but you got to be able to prove that. And I think Boise State, I would love to see that rivalry brought back. I think Boise State usually plays an FCS school every-ish year anyway. I mean, we're playing UT Martin this year. Boise State tries to put a kind of a weaker game on the schedule. And I mean, why not put Idaho? If you're going to put an FCS school on there, why not put Idaho and bring it in? I absolutely agree with that. All right. Awesome. So great discussion so far. This is what I wanted to do with these videos. It's exactly the vision I had for them, because I want, with this Boise State season, I think has a chance to start leading into a historic era for Boise State. You have these moments in Boise State history where they turn a page, they turn a corner. And while Boise State overall as a team has not gone downhill, I'm not saying that at all. They've definitely plateaued a little bit. They haven't been the team that is making the run for the playoffs like Cincinnati did, or making that discussion. I mean, I remember back in the days when Boise State was getting talked about for potentially going into the national championship. I mean, you talk about that 2010 season, 2009 season, when they started off the years in the top 10, I think it was top 5 to start the season for Boise State in 2010. So that has not been where Boise State has been. And I think they are headed back towards that direction with Andy Avalos. And this is exactly what I wanted to do. When we're talking about historic seasons for Boise State, a chance to start building towards a historic future, you want to talk about that historic past and bringing up and talking about those playing days for you on on the green, not the blue, but back in your Boise State perspective on that, it's exactly what I wanted to do, to tie the past and the present into the future together. So thanks so much for that Q&A. We're going to move into the analysis page. We're going to go talk about this Boise State 2022 team. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what the 2021 defensive front seven was able to do. So we're going to read off some stats here real quick. So Boise State, first off, the front seven was responsible for 417 out of 790 tackles. So the front seven was responsible for about 52% of the tackles. Now, that is not necessarily the number exactly you want to see, close to 50%. A lot of the secondary cleaning up on those. So some improvements to be made. But the good news is that they return those tackles, those 413 tackles, they return almost all the players who made them. The only major players that they're missing is Riley Wimpy. He's the only one that is his 71 tackles, second in the team. He's gone. He's out, obviously a longtime player for Boise State, and he has moved on now. But while it might not be the goal you're looking at, 52%, they're all coming back, and that experience is only going to improve and grow. Some other stats here. They returned 28 out of the 29 sacks that they had for Boise State last year. So the players that made the tackles and the sacks last year, almost all of them are back. Now, I will say that number 29 sacks is the lowest number of sacks Boise State has had in the season since 2017. So something that needs to be improved upon if you don't count the 2020 season. That's just going to be a disclaimer. Yeah. All these stats, obviously 2020 reduced season doesn't count as far as what you're comparing it to. So, yeah. But 29 sacks and 28 of those sacks are coming back as far as the players returning with them. And then Boise State allowed 158.7 yards per game on the ground as far as the rushing game goes, which was the most that they'd allowed since 2016. But I will say this, while they started slow, and obviously there was a lot of running yards put up against Boise State early on, they finished incredibly strong. So you look at the yardage totals that Boise State gave up early in the season last year, 255 yards versus UCF, 246 versus Oklahoma State, 235 versus Utah State. The last big yardage total, though, was 307 versus Air Force. After that, Boise State defense turned a corner. 105 loud versus Colorado State, a team that averaged 164 on the season. 77 versus Fresno State held the Bulldogs under 100 yards rushing, a team that was averaging close to 140 on the season. Wyoming, a team that's averaging over 200 yards rushing, only got 132. New Mexico, a team that averaged over 121, only got 84. And then San Diego State put up over 100, but 57 yards below their season average. So the Boise State defense started off slow, but they definitely improved down the stretch. Can they carry that momentum into the season? Now, one more stat total I want to point out here is that they only allowed 19 points per game. That is the fewest points per game that they have allowed since 2012. So a lot of yards in between, but the bend but don't break, a lot of turnovers in the red zone forced, a lot of field goals attempts forced in the red zone. Boise State might have given up yards between the 20s, but inside the 20, they held strong. I think that points to Andy Avalos. He's playing high octane. He's bringing in the intensity. He might allow a few yards here and there, but at the end, he's going to make the game count where it matters. So Boise State, a lot of yards given up, but better towards the back half of the season and throughout consistent in the red zone. Can Boise State build on that momentum coming into this season? What was your perspective watching the new head coaching staff, watching this defense? Obviously, I know that we both being defensive guys as far as our primary playing positions, we key in on what the defense is doing. When you were watching that defense play last season, what was your perspective? What was your reactions?
The intensity that they're playing, and they have another year of coaching under Avalos. When I was out there, one of the practices, Avalos was coaching the inside linebackers and how to take on a block with the sled, and how to shoot the hips and lock your arms out.
Oh, right. I love to see that.
I love it watching, because usually the head coaches, they just stand around and yeah. And Avalos is right in the middle of it. That's the blue collar work ethic that's synonymous with Boise State. And he played here. He, for his athletic ability, the guy was amazing.
That I love what you're talking about with Andy Avalos being down in the trenches, literally working with the linebacker. You never, I mean, I won't say never, but you very rarely see a head coach that hands-on. And when we were talking about coaches coming in for Boise State, when obviously Brian Hart's leaving and they need to bring in a new guy, I think the name that popped up to most people's minds was Kellen Moore. And I will be honest, I think that was also my number one thought as well. But I always said that if we're not going to bring in Kellen Moore, we need to bring in a defensive focused guy. And like I said, when we're talking about Boise State plateauing, I think part of the reason that we saw that in the past decade or so of Boise State football is I think the defense has not been as dominant as it was in the Fiesta Bowl days. When you look at those teams, they had great offenses. They had those big names, Kellen Moore, Jared Zabransky, Ian Johnson. Those are the guys that capture the highlights. But when you watch the game film, when you go back and you watch those highlights or you watch those full games, the Boise State is winning those games because of their defense. They've always had a dominant defense that they could build the team around, and that's what got them into their wins. And Boise State, honestly, that hasn't been the focus. Brian Harsin, obviously a former quarterback, offensive coordinator, big into the offense, bringing in some great offensive recruits. But I think the defensive focus dropped a little bit. And that is something that Andy Avalos, I said it at the beginning, we need a defensive guy. And he came in and he has totally revolutionized the intensity, the focus, and I think the coaching style that's going into this Boise State defense.
And he's intensified the physicality of which the defense plays.
Is that something you see when you're watching the practices? Do those feel more intense than previously?
Yes. And the players mimic the attitude of their head coach. And Andy on the football field, he cannot sit still. He's all over. And that's the intensity. The players have to buy in, and it's rock and roll. Kick the tires, light the fires.
I'm excited to see what Boise State's able to do with this defense. Let's start talking a little bit about that 2022 team. We've talked a little bit about newcomers that Andy Avalos has been adding in. We've talked about that focus on the right type of player for Boise State, because it's not just about going out and getting the flashiest recruit. It's about getting the guy that's going to fit not just into your defensive scheme and your mold, but into the play style and into the hard attitude, honestly, that comes with being a Bronco. So I'm not going to list every recruit that Andy Avalos was able to bring in, but he did bring in a great defensive crop here, and some of the names that jump up to you right off the top. So George Charles, the Greek freak from Weber State, 17 career sacks so far. Definitely a player who can come in and help Boise State with those low sack numbers. A big guy, 6'3", 260 pounds. And like I said, they called him the Greek freak. He is from Greece originally. So Boise State, he actually played, though he went through high school in Idaho. So an Idaho guy coming back to play his final season here at Boise State. And then we also have defensive end, another transfer, JUCO transfer, Cortez Hogan, another big guy, 6'3". He's going to be coming in, Cortez Hogan Jr. That's a guy that's been getting a lot of hype and as talked about, might show some stuff at the spring game as well. And then linebacker here, 6'3", 220 pounds. One of the guys I'm probably most excited about, four-star Deshaun Misa, who had 12 Power 5 offers. He's actually the sixth highest rated recruit all time, according to 24/7 Sports. Sixth highest rated recruit all time for Boise State. So obviously those stars are just stars. You got to come in, you got to prove some things. And he is a guy that has dealt with some injury issues in high school. But if he can come in and prove that rating off the bat, he's a guy who might be able to contribute to a linebacker core. We're going to talk about it here in a second. Has a lot of question marks. Has a lot of guys that doesn't necessarily have the same star power that previous linebacker cores have had for Boise State, with the DeMarcus Lawrence outside linebacker, but at DN. But, those type of star players, Leighton Vander Esch and Curtis Weaver type of players, not necessarily those type of players that jump off the board to you here for this defense. Maybe he's able to come and make an impact. And then there were 7 other D-line/linebacker positioning groups that were recruited in this class. So a very heavy defensive focus coming in, which is what you'd expect from a defensive-minded head coach. He didn't ignore the offense. We'll talk about that when we get to the offensive preview. But a coach that put the right focus on a defense that definitely needs to improve, has shown some improvement so far. And let's talk about this 2022 season. Let's look a little bit at some of those stars and starters that are going to be coming for this Boise State defense. Some of those big names that are going to be popping off the board here for this defensive group.
For Boise State, you have like the defensive end, you have a nose tackle, you have a defensive tackle, then you have an edge rusher. And the edge is kind of a hybrid.
Outside linebacker kind of,
Yeah. The biggest guy we have there is that George Tarlos from Weber State, right?
Yes.
He's what, 6'3"?
6'3".
Yeah, 260 pounds. And the other, we got Dimitri there. He's 260 pounds also. Dimitri Washington.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a big guy too. When you stop the run, then you can control the game. And our goal when I played is hold the offense to under 100 yards and hold the offense to under 200 yards passing. And, it's gap responsibility, not losing leverage, knowing, based on what coverage you're in, who has contain, who has force, who has fill. And so everybody has to be on the same, have the same game plan. Tell you what, if we can control the line of scrimmage by gap integrity and not have injuries, you can be the best football team in the world. And if you get players hurt, it's going to change everything. And you just got to adapt and this next guy up. That's the motto of Boise State, next one up. That's why you got to pay attention all the time, because you never know when it's going to be your time. And you got to be prepared to shine. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Building that depth. And I think that's something when you talk about Andy Avalos, he's not just focused on, or Spencer Danielson as a whole, but Andy Avalos as well, and this defensive staff. They're not just focused on their first and second string guys. They are preaching that motto that you could be the next guy up throughout the entire team. And Boise State's always been great at that.
Yeah, it's been like that since I played at Boise State. I mean, Coach Kreiner and Coach Setensich every day. You got to be prepared. You never know when somebody's going to get hurt.
So talking about that next man up mentality, Boise State losing their number one linebacker, one of their top defenders there in Wimpy there last season. So who's going to be the next guy up? Let's lead off with the linebackers, because we've kind of talked about this as well, but they're the quarterbacks of the defense, where however your linebacker core is doing, they're going to be the ones that are going to be directing how the defense performs as a whole. And you want to have stalwart, strong players in that position. No, it doesn't necessarily have to be the best skilled players, but you want to have the players that are going to have the mentality to lead the defense and to have that cerebral side. Zeke Noah coming back, fifth-year senior. He's coming back for the defense. He is going to be, I think, you talk about a guy who's not necessarily the most explosive player on the field, but definitely a guy who brings that leadership, and he's going to be a very dependable, reliable player for Boise State. Now, after that, there's a lot of question marks, because Boise State, it was probably the linebacker position was probably the weakest on the defense last season as far as the depth there. And so we have to ask, who's that next guy up? Redshirt senior DJ Schramm showed some things, 24 tackles for him. And then you got the true freshman Deshaun Misa coming in. And then there's just a bunch of question marks. You look through the Boise State roster, there's a bunch of guys that have a linebacker next to them, but haven't really seen much playing time. Who's going to be that next guy up here for Boise State? Do you have any opinions here on Noah or any of the guys that we've talked about so far here for the defense for linebacker?
What I would say Noah needs to do, I mean, he has the physical, he's 5'11", 240, right? And so he has leverage on the offensive line when he takes on an offensive lineman. He needs to read quicker, which will make him quicker. The other thing with our inside linebackers in general from last season, and I saw it a couple times in the scrimmages, is when play goes away, I stay at home. And if I'm the backside inside backer, and I've seen, especially last season a lot, the inside linebacker, the backside inside linebacker would cross the center's face going towards the play side. And what would the running back do? Cut back through backside B gap. And oh my God, you don't know how many times I screamed and yelled at the TV. And the proper angles of pursuit. and tackling. Because if I'm an inside linebacker, I typically have Phil. Phil is my angle is at a 45-degree angle to the running backs or quarterback's inside hip, because force comes from outside. If you're in cover 2, cloud coverage, cover 2, corners have force. If you're in cover 3, which we would call sky, safety, sky starts with S, safety, that they have force. And so you got to know who has force, who has fill, and you got to rep that during practice, defensive practices, based on coverage, because it can change how it started out originally. And then if there's motions and shifts and things change, there has to be communication. So everybody's on the same page. Every gap is filled. You have force, you have fill, who has contain. And I think the linebackers maybe do a little bit better job of reading pass routes. Yeah, I was taught over and over and over and over again. Yeah, like if you're in cover 2, number 2 goes vertical, you run with them to elevate the pass. So the safeties have a chance to make a play on the ball. If I have hook to curl, I start to drop. Number 2 goes out. I instantly have to look at number 1, the outside receiver, because somebody's going out. That means somebody's coming in. So I need to change the angle of my drop to intersect where that curl route's coming over the top. Because if number 2 goes out, number 1's going to be curling back around to the inside. So I can get a pick or knock the ball down. So.
I think you're definitely onto something there with the way that the defense played their coverage last year, because, and this is my perspective, I might be totally off on this, but it seemed to me that last season you're coming in with a secondary group. This year we're talking about the linebackers having question marks. Well, last season the secondary, they'd lost Avery Williams, they'd lost some other guys there, so the secondary had some question marks, whereas the D-line had some returners. You had Riley Wimpy in the center leading everything in the linebacker. Of course, you maybe had a little more faith in them, and it seemed to me like Boise State was playing a little bit more of a coverage defense, at least early on in the season, which I think impacted the way that they were able to stop the run. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this season with maybe some learning points from last year with the inability to stop the run, need to focus more on that, but also having a secondary that's going to be strong. I think they're probably one of the strongest positions on the team is going to be the secondary with some amazing players back there. So a little more strength in the secondary this year. Does Boise State then focus a little bit more on stopping the run, especially with a linebacker group that is not the most experienced group out there as far as some of the guys that we named, as far as the playing time they've had, as far as the year group. Probably the most explosive guy on the defense, and as far as the linebackers go, is going to be the newcomer Deshaun Misa, as far as the most upside, but he's a freshman coming in. It's very hard to come in and show consistent success at linebacker as a true freshman because it is such a cerebral position. So it's going to be a big question mark is how Boise State can step up here at the linebacker core.
Oh, I agree. But you know what the most important position is on defense? D-line. Because if you're going to have a great run game, the D-line's going to limit the offensive linemen from getting up on the linebackers, keep gap control, know how to take on double teams. So the inside linebacker can scrape to the running back or the quarterback, whoever has the ball. And if you're going to have a great secondary, you need a better defensive line than the secondary, because the D-line can put pressure on the quarterback, sack him, make him alter his throw. Because with the RPO offenses, it's all about timing.
I love that you bring up the D-line, because that's the next position group we're looking at. We are talking about some monsters here on the D-line. You already mentioned him earlier, but Scott Matlock, 6'4", 300 pounds, 41 tackles last season, 7 sacks, led the teams in sacks, really had a breakout season. I think the year before he had 20 tackles, obviously reduced season, so that's still a good workload, but 41 tackles, 7 sacks, of forced fumbles, also had a receiving touchdown. I don't remember if you remember the play, but they lined him up. I'll have to try and find out. I'll try and throw it in the video, but they lined him up and they threw it past him, and he had a receiving touchdown. So he's going to be a big impactor on the defensive line. Then you also have Jackson Cravens, 39 tackles, 2 sacks last season, 6'2", 305 pounds. And then a play that I personally, you didn't have the biggest impact last season, but I think as a player who could have an explosive year this year, maybe explode onto the scene, it was Divine Obichari, fifth-year senior for Boise State, 16 tackles last year, and only one sack, but it was against Fresno State. And it was probably the most aggressive sack I saw all season last year for Boise State. I believe it had the most lost yards on a single sack. It was like 12 or 14 yards. Just totally destroyed the Fresno State quarterback. Anyhow, he's also a big guy, 6'3", 308 pounds. If you add up these three guys, you're looking at almost a ton of weight, over 900 pounds, and together they are almost 20 feet tall. So they could easily look over any two-story building if they were standing on each other's shoulders. The defensive line for me is a group that has star players, that has depth. We talk about Scott Matlock definitely going to the NFL next season. They have the depth, they have the experience, and we talk about experience. I mean, these are all seniors. Scott Matlock, redshirt senior. Craven, redshirt senior. Obichari, fifth-year senior. And they have the star power. Linebackers might have some question marks, but I am rock solid with the defensive line this season. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, the defensive line, they could be the most dominant force of our defense. But like when I played, why I had so many tackles is because of the defensive ends that I played behind, Michel Bergeau and Marcus Cook. Michel Bergeau played in the CFL, Canadian Football League, for 8-9 years. Marcus Cook was the first pick by the Washington Redskins after his senior year. They didn't have a first round pick, but they had a second round pick, and he was the first player they picked. He was with them 6 or 7 years, won a Super Bowl. But I mean, no offensive tackle would come down on me. They would just crush the offense. Like when they run veer, the offensive, depending if the defensive tackle is in a 1, the offensive tackle will come straight down on me. If the defensive tackle is in a 3, which is outside shade of the guard, then they will double team the defensive tackle in a 3, and then the tackle would come up on me after double teaming the defensive tackle in the 3. But they would just crush him down, and I would just scrape right to C gap. I would have quarterback. They would take fullback, and it made life fun. And our linebackers, if this D line can do the same, our linebackers are going to have a great season. Totally believe that.
I think this has a chance to be one of a historic defensive line for Boise State. I think it has a chance to be one of the most dominant defensive lines we've seen in the last 10 years. And maybe even beyond. I am so excited about this Boise State defensive line. You talked about the edge. This is great. We'll lead right into that. We'll label them the hybrid D-end, offensive linebacker, edge, whatever you want to throw out there as the term. The guys coming from the outside. That will make this section simple.
The edge rusher is typically your most athletic and fastest defensive lineman. Dimitri, I think probably has the best chance. He's a senior, redshirt senior. The guy's 6'3", 260, and that's a pretty good size for an edge rusher, and it kind of fits the NFL mode these days.
I love that you talk about Dimitri Washington here, a guy that I definitely have circled as a leader for this defense, for this edge position here. 41 tackles, 2 sacks, an interception with a 37-yard return last season. He didn't have the most explosive year, but a lot of people also forget that he suffered from injuries in 2020. So he didn't play a full season. He had an injury the second or third game very early on for Boise State in what was already a reduced season. So he was kind of readjusting a little bit. Obviously, new defensive scheme, new coordinators, and coming off of an injury. We all know how hard it is to come off of injuries, especially in the game of football. So he, I think, was kind of getting his feet back under him, literally, because I think he had a lower body injury that he was dealing with. So getting his feet back under him, I think he is going to have a turnaround season this year. I think he's definitely going to be a force there on the defense, racking up the sacks and helping against the run. A player, though, that I am extremely excited about, I think he had a great year last year. I actually got to talk to his parents prior to the UCF game, was Isaiah Banya, the redshirt junior, 36 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 6 sacks, second on the team in sacks, only the Matlock. He had 3 sacks versus UCF, 2 versus Nevada, and then I won against, I don't remember who the last one came against. And he's a player that every time he was on the field, he didn't always get a sack, but he was getting at the quarterback every single time. He was harassing the quarterback. He was around the ball. A player that it doesn't necessarily bring in all the eyes as far as the guy that you'd not like Demetri Washington being a bigger player there and definitely, I think, a little more experience, but a guy who I'm extremely excited about. If he can get on the field, it's a deep unit, but if he can get on the field, I think he can make an impact.
Oh, I agree. You know, he's kind of, I mean, he's 6'4", 225. So he's very fast, right? And watching the ball to get off and, you know, those offensive tackles, yeah, I mean, if you can time it right, they barely get out of their stance and you're by them. Yep. And that's when the fun happens, when you hit the quarterback. You know, the one good thing we do have right now, which we didn't have last season, we have a lot of depth in our defensive line. Absolutely. And that's going to pay off major benefits as we get closer to the end of the season. Because, you know, injuries happen in this game. And
absolutely.
The more depth and better prepared they are, we can win the conference.
Yeah, you talk about that depth for Boise State. You're right. Defensive line, D ends. I didn't even actually. I got distracted. I didn't even finish listing the other D ends. We got Shane Irwin, who had some good play last season, 35 tackles, 6th year player for Boise State.
I'm a big fan of his because his number is number 55.
Oh, so. That's great. He's got to live up, lot to live up to there. But
but yeah, you know what? He's carrying on the tradition, right?
Absolutely. He plays with a lot of energy. He does. He definitely earns his way onto the field. 35 tackles, 3 sacks last season, a forced fumble. And then, of course, you got George Tarles coming in, the guy we already talked about, the transfer from Weber State. So I'm excited. I mean, like I said, some question marks at linebacker as far as the guys behind the starters there, at least but not behind Noah. But you talk about the D-line, the D-ends. This is going to be a very dominant front group for Boise State. It's going to have to see how the linebackers can adapt as well.
Yeah. And, you know, in the first games versus Oregon State, right?
Pac-12 team. Yeah.
Yeah. And I played at Oregon State my freshman year. It's going to, if we beat Oregon State, because Oregon State's getting better. They have a really good running back. Their head coach, he used to coach at Boise State, and he was coached at Idaho. They're a lot better, and it's going to be a tough game. But yeah, I'll definitely be rooting for Boise State.
Yeah, that is a big one. You got the Pac-12 game in Oregon State Stadium, which I was talking to. I think I forget who I was talking to, but they mentioned that Oregon State hadn't lost at home last season. So I mean, they didn't have a great overall record, but they also didn't lose at home. So Boise State coming into Oregon State, it's a team that Boise State has played in the past. You know, there was a few years that was almost semi-regular basis that they were playing them. New era of college football under Andy Avalos. Can they come and get a win? He played them a couple of times. It's funny that's the first game. We're here previewing the 2022 season, and originally from Oregon. I didn't even plan that. That's just perfect.
Oh, I know. The last time I was honorary captain for Boise State, I think it was 2010. Okay. That's when Oregon State came here and played us at Bronco Stadium, and that's when Michelle Bergeau was head of the varsity B club, and he had me be the honorary captain, one of the honorary captains. I think the other one was D. Pickett. Yeah. And we beat him. And
we did.
It was great.
That's got to be a good feeling.
Oh yeah, it was awesome. Yeah. But I came back here because, you know, growing up, it was just my mom and I, and she got sick, and I talked to her doctor, and he said that she would do a lot better if I was back here. So I transferred back, and Coach Kreiner was nice enough to let me join the program. And to this day, I thank him for helping me be part of the program again.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that inside info there. That's amazing. I mean, it's obviously that sad situation there with the family members, but it's amazing the way that things work out, that God works things, and you find yourself in a perfect home, finding yourself perfect. I mean, I can't imagine you as a career Oregon State Beaver, but the Boise State image is definitely a lot better.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't even be having this conversation if that hadn't happened. I mean, it's all the little things that kind of go along. It's crazy.
It's kind of like a ripple effect. You never know, what thing you throw into the pond and how it's going to affect you. But you just keep your priorities in the right area, and you just keep moving forward. Be kind to everyone. It's a blue collar way.
Well, talking about that blue collar way and doing the right thing, let's talk about some keys to success, some doing the right things that Boise State can do for their defense. This will be 3 keys to success for the defensive line, the front 7 linebackers defensive line. I'll give it another key to success when I talk about the secondary, but talking about this front 7, what can the defense do to have a successful 2022 season? So we'll lead 3 here. My first key for Boise State is increased quarterback pressure. We talked about that earlier. Low numbers last season compared to what Boise State has done in the past. Only the 29 sacks, tied for the fewest since 2017, as long as you don't count 2020. Struggled a little bit against some of those rushing quarterbacks. Dylan Gabriel had a pretty good, obviously, Heisman candidate before his injury, so good player, but he had some success against Boise State on the ground. Sanders had some good success from Oklahoma State against Boise State. And then even players that didn't necessarily show yardage on the stat sheet had a ton of time in the pocket. I mean, Boise State, it wasn't necessarily the defensive scheme. They were sending guys. I mean, they'd be sending 5 guys, and they still couldn't get to the quarterback at times. Definitely hurt Boise State against UTEP early on. Obviously able to win that game by a lot, but there were some times I think that it impacted Boise State against San Diego State a little bit, not being able to get the pressure on the quarterback. Shut down the run game, but definitely gave them way too much time to pass. Our secondary is great, but if you give any quarterback 5-7 seconds to throw the ball, they're going to find someone who's open. You can only cover so long. So for me, take pressure off the secondary, increase quarterback pressure. I think job one for any defense is stopping the run. But for Boise State, I think that is going to be a focus that they're going to be able to shift to. They showed improvement on that last season, but something they were never able to get to was getting to that sack total. They have some great players coming back. They have the intensity factor, which is the most important factor in sacks, is being able to – you can have the scheme all you want, but when it comes down to sacks, you're talking about beating the man in front of you. That's all it comes down to, is can you get around them faster? Can you beat the offensive linemen out of their snap? Are you in the film room? Are you studying the playbooks of the opposing teams? Do you know what they're likely to call? Can you get to the quarterback first? That's what it all comes down to. And I think with the uptick in intensity, we're going to see an improvement in the sacks here for Boise State. So that's key 1 for me. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that before we move on to key 2.
Yeah, I do. To me, the number one thing that our defense needs to do is keep gap integrity. And because if we can stop the run and force the offense to pass, then, obviously, so if it's a run situation, the D line's reading the offensive line. And if it's a passing situation, you can tee off. And so we would communicate, like, if it's a pass situation, we would have like a fire call or something. Our defensive ends would widen. Our interior defensive linemen would get into 3s or get in AA gaps and create mismatches, but watch the ball. Especially the defensive ends on the outside, you widen out, so it makes it even harder for the offensive tackle to get to you, and you're just watching the football. And obviously sacks, D-line will get a lot of sacks if we get the receivers jammed at the line of scrimmage and we slow down their passing game, because it's all timing. If you can disrupt the timing, it gives the D-line more pressure. But I think the number one reason we didn't have as many sacks as we have in other seasons is because we had a lot of D linemen hurt. And that affected our ability to pass rush. We like I said earlier, we had the kid from Bora, Bolt, playing defense last year. And now he's playing wide receiver.
Right.
He's some edge rusher, right?
Yeah.
So 215 pounds, 6'6", looks like a beanpole, right? But he's the fastest guy in the football team. So depth. They have another year of coaching under Avalos' staff. This was a new staff last season.
Yeah.
Harsin had 100%, over the course of time that he was the head football coach at Boise State, we had 100% turnover of the coaching staff. So last year was year one of getting back to the basics. Now we have year two. We'll be a lot better than we were last year, and we have a lot more depth than we had last year.
Absolutely.
And and so if our D line does their job, our linebackers can do their job, and vice versa. And you have to communicate. The whole thing about having a successful defense is everybody's on the same page. And secondary communicating to linebackers communicating to the D line, and we're all in it together.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree with that. And that actually leads perfectly into what my second key to the game was, which is unit versus individual for the focus as far as this defense goes. I mean, Boise State defenses that when we've kind of been plateauing over the last decade or so, there's definitely been that one player that was kind of the focus of the defense. And the defense was kind of almost shaped around that one player. I mean, I'm talking about the Leighton Van Der Esch days, or the Curtis Weaver, or even DeMarcus Lawrence. Boise State, you had that kind of one defensive player, and it seemed like everyone was just kind of waiting for that one player to go out and make the big plays. And Boise State, what I saw in this defense last season is they started, and it was something I was calling for all of 2020, and we never saw it. But coming into 2021, what we saw out of Boise State's defense was a team defensive focus. Everyone's covering their section of their field. They're playing assignment football, and they're trusting that the guy to the left, the guy behind them is going to have their section of the field covered. And we finally started to see that last season. And maybe it was because we didn't have that big star name. I mean, I know a lot of the media wanted Riley Wimpy to be that guy, and I don't think he necessarily had the overall full athletic ability to be that number one guy. But I think that was a good thing. I think Boise State finally, because they didn't have that one guy to rely on, everybody had to step up. And that's what I think we need to do this season. I think we started seeing it towards the last half of last season. I think that's what we can find for Boise State's success. We can talk about all these big star guys, these guys that can explode off the scene. But finally, it's going to come down to the coaching overall and who can we get a consistent defense overall.
It's a defense that's accountable to the other members of the defense. And that's what makes a great defense. Nobody cares who gets all the accolades. They just care that the defense succeeds. And like I said earlier, it's everybody doing their job to the best of their ability and not letting down your teammates. Because, if I'm supposed to have B gap, that means the inside linebacker is going to have A gap. If I'm a defensive tackle, if I'm in a 3, I got B gap. That means inside linebacker has A gap. If I'm that defensive tackle in a 3 and I go into A gap and your middle linebacker's in A gap also, running back's going through B gap. Whose responsibility is that? Defensive tackles. And vice versa. If I'm the inside linebacker and I go to B gap, I'm supposed to have A gap. That's my fault. And I let my teammates down. That buy-in that the team is bigger than through team success comes individual success. It's not the other way around. And that's what a lot of players get confused with, but not at Boise State. And because, we have to be fundamentally, we have to be superior to the top teams that we play, because a lot of teams are bigger, faster, stronger than we are. So it all comes down to our belief system, believing in each other, and the fundamentals that we are taught. That everybody does their job, and it's like all the puzzles fit in perfectly. Yeah.
Right. And I think that Andy Avalos has brought that focus back to Boise. Not that it ever left, but I think that he is re-intensifying that focus for Boise State. I think that was what we saw last season. Whereas, obviously, and I'm going to use 2020 as my biggest example. I saw so many times in 2020, especially you start playing some teams that are going to exploit it like Air Force, where you have to have that everyone covering their assignment football. But in 2020, I definitely saw so many missed opportunities where guys were out of position, where they were trying to go and make the big play versus being where they needed to be and having the team make the big play. That's why I see how this Boise State team is a return to that.
Yes. It's about being disciplined.
Yes. Yeah. Hands down.
It. Yeah.
And that, I think that leads to the biggest overall here, talking about being disciplined, coming in with the right focus. My final key to the game here, my third or key to the season, is overcome the early season jitters and slow starts. Boise State, not just last season, but they have for a little while here had some slow starts to the season. They've kind of recovered at the end of the year or halfway through the season. But we talk about last year, giving up a lot of yards on the ground, not very consistent pressure on the quarterback, riding the ship. So I get that UCF game. I saw so many missed tackles. In Boise State, it's a common issue that every team across the country struggles with. I think we definitely saw the impact of COVID and the players not being able to practice the way they were used to, not having the full seasons that they were used to, definitely impacting how teams were preparing for the season. I think that impacted early on for Boise State last year. So how is Boise State practicing? Are they bringing the intensity, which it sounds like they are? Are they replicating that in-game environment, which it sounds like they are? Watching the spring game, that Boise State defense, they looked ready. I mean, obviously it's a spring game, so that's going to be, it's hard to analyze, but they looked like they were ready to play, that they were wrapping up, that they were tackling with the right intensity and the right techniques. So Boise State, the biggest issue for Boise State, I think, their defense. You look at those Boise State defenses of the past, those great ones, and I'm going to use what I view as the golden era of Boise State defense, 2009 to 2011. They started off with high-profile teams with good offenses. I mean, Oregon, Virginia Tech, Georgia, big-name teams, and their defenses were dominant right off the bat. They didn't need a couple of games in the season to get on track. They were ready from the get-go. And that's what Boise State has to do, especially coming in and playing Oregon State, a Pac-12 team in their home stadium. Can Boise State overcome the first half slumps, the first half of the season slumps, first half of the game slumps? Can they overcome those early? That's going to be, I think, the biggest key overall to success is, can Boise State start off hot this season?
Yeah, we've started the last couple of years, like last year, Oklahoma State, right? Up, then lose. We kind of melted down defensively in the second half. We ran out of players. It's going to be different. And plus, it was hot here first week in September. In Corvallis, it's going to be 50 degrees to 60 degrees.
Yeah, perfect conditions.
Perfect football conditions. And, I'm looking forward to the season. Defense, we have some amazing players, but it's all about chemistry and everybody doing their job. And, that's what we were taught when I played at Boise State. Do your job and do your job to the best of your ability, and don't let your teammates down. And having coached football and been a high school head football coach, priorities: faith, family, academics, then football. Take care of the first three. Last one takes care of itself. But, faith, if you're not a religious person, have faith in your family, have faith in your teammates, have faith in the school that you play for. It's just
being grounded to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. And that we have the perfect head football coach to lead our program back to where we used to be. I'm a very big fan of Coach Avalos. He brings the right intensity, mindset to lead us back to where we used to be. And I tell you, and having a inside linebackers, the head football coach at Boise State, was like I won the lottery. I was like, that's perfect. We have the right mindset to win now, right? So let's lead. We're
talking about a coach who can bring Boise State back to the way things used to be, the golden eras of Boise State, and building into a future history that's going to be as strong as the past. Let's talk about some predictions here. So Boise State, before we lead off with some predictions, let's talk about this schedule a little bit overall. Boise State last year, one of the toughest schedules I'd ever seen Boise State play. maybe ever. I mean, you had Oklahoma State, who ended the year as a top 10 team. You had BYU, who was a top 10 team, a team we were able to beat. UCF, that started the season as a top 25 team with a Heisman candidate in their quarterback, who ended up getting hurt. Otherwise, they'd have had a much better season overall. Air Force, 10-win team. Fresno State, top 25 team when we played them. Wyoming showing some improvement. San Diego State, obviously having a great year. Tough schedule. And a lot of good running teams. We look, Boise State had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams that averaged over 170 yards rushing on the year. So you've got a brand new head coaching staff, a brand new defensive coordinator who's never coached in the FBS level at his position, FCS before that. And that's a step from the FCS to FBS. It definitely takes a little bit of a different a mindset and approach there as far as coaching goes, the type of teams that you're playing. And then just overall, a very tough team and losing some starters across the defense. It was a tough task. A little bit of an easier task this year. I know you had something you wanted to say there.
How many games are we going to win this year? It just depends on how healthy we are. The health of the team determines how many wins we're going to have. And, if we want to stop programs that run the ball a lot, we got to have 7 or 8 in the box. Having 6 in the box is hard to stop the run. We're having 5 in the box. And, number one thing on defense, stop the run first, forcing them to passing situations. And that's when you bring the heat. You have line stunts, you send a line, you try to put 4 on 3. So one guy comes free. And, if you're in cover 1, you're bringing 5. If you're in cover 0, you're bringing 6. If you're in cover 0, reroute the guys at the line of scrimmage. Give the D-line, the linebackers a chance to get to the quarterback. And, we could be undefeated if we don't have a lot of injuries. If we have injuries, we could 8-3, 8-4. It's just that's what kind of derailed us last year because we really didn't have a lot of D linemen, so we had to go to 3 D linemen with a stand-up outside rush guy, edge guy,
right?
And that made it easier for teams to run the football against us because we just didn't have the personnel to stop it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that it is it's a boon, I think, to have a little bit of an easier schedule to work against this season for Boise State. You look at teams that, had good rushing yards last season, Oregon State, San Diego State, BYU, Wyoming, but most of those teams are missing their key players from the season ago that gave them those yards. Oregon State averaged over 214 yards, but their top running back, over 1,300 yards, is gone. San Diego State averaged 175 yards a game, but their number 1 rushing back, Greg Bell, 1,000 yards last season, he's gone. BYU, 188 yards a game. Tyler Algier, their top running back, 1,600 yards, he's gone. Wyoming lost a bunch of players across the board, but Valladay, their main running back, he's gone. So really, you look at these teams, you start looking at the schedule as a whole, really the only one that jumps off the board as far as a team that's actually returning their top running back and is a consistent, strong running team is Air Force. And they're always going to be a threat in the running game. But overall for Boise State, you're talking about a team that I think is going to be improving anyway, with the coaching staff having a year under them to be able to install their vision in this team, experience coming back where you didn't necessarily have that experience last year, especially on the D-line. I think that Boise State is going to have an excellent game, an excellent season against the run game this year. I think it's going to be a dramatic improvement across the board.
The whole game's changed too because you can't practice as much as you used to, like tackling and stuff like that.
Right.
The physicality of the game and practice, they've really limited that. But the intensity of which they're practicing at game tempo, which is perfect because that's how are you going to perform in the game if you never practice that speed? So you're used to it.
Boise State, you talk about teams that their past teams that won those big games, that had success. They did it on the backs of their defense and primarily the defensive line. You win games at the defense and offensive line. And I started off this season not very hopeful necessarily about having a truly dominant season. I mean, 9-10 wins is kind of what I'm looking at previous to coming into this series. But the more I look at this, the more I look at the schedules, and I'll have a full schedule preview for my final season preview video at the end of this series, where I go through every single team and give you a detailed analysis. So my perspective might change as we go throughout this, like it already has. But you look at, I think a prime example is the 2012 Boise State team. That team had a lot of question marks on offense. You know, they had Joe Southwood coming in at quarterback, replacing Kellen Moore. You had lots of question marks at wide receiver. The running back game, you'd lost Doug Martin. So you had a lot of question marks. Now, Boise State, obviously, they have an experienced quarterback. It's a little bit of a different situation, but you have a lot of question marks at wide receiver. You have an offensive line that is trying to improve but struggled last season. You have a running back group that Holani's great, but he hasn't had a lot of experience so far because he's dealt with so many injuries and reduced seasons and everything. So you have so many questions on offense, but that 2012 team was probably one of the worst overall offensive units that Boise State ever had, and they still managed to win 11 games. I think that you look at this team with the schedule that they have, with the defense the way they are, we could be, and the offense who's definitely better than that 2012 team, we could be headed back in the same direction. To wrap up my predictions here, and I'm not going to give an official record prediction here because I'm going to say that for my final video, but I am hopeful, and the more I delve into it, and I've got to control the fan side of me, because the fan side of me just wants to go 12-0. We're going to win the national championship, you know. So I have to keep that part of me restrained. But the more I get into here and the more I look at the facts and I look at the data, the more hopeful I am about this Boise State season. And talking about that data, a few more predictions here. I think that Boise State's going to hold an average. So last season held teams to 158.7 yards per game average. Their worst since 2016. I think this year they hold teams to an average of 130 yards per game. I think we're going to show a dramatic improvement this year on that. I think that the sacks numbers is going to improve. I don't think that it's going to be necessarily where it needs to be, but it's going to be better than the 29 sacks that it was last year. I think we're going to see a definite improvement on that. I think the coverage play for the front seven will not be so much a focus because we have such a strong secondary coming back and the running game was such a weakness. I think Boise State is going to focus against the running game this year. So we might see some different coverages as far as defending against that passing game, a little more focus on stopping the run and putting pressure on the quarterback. But I think that is going to play into better run defense, which is going to allow the secondary to make an impact in the passing game, force balls into the air and to the hands of our great interception machines that we have out there in the defensive backfield. I think that they'll hold opponents to an average 18 points per game. Last season, 19 points per game. I think they'll get 18 points per game or less this season, an improvement in that area as Andy Avalos' defense continues to dominate in the red zone. And I think Spencer Danielson has a great shot, and I'm going to call it right now. I think Spencer Danielson will win Mountain West Coordinator of the Year because I think this defense is going to be so improved. I think that it's going to be so evident that the success that Boise State has next season, whatever that record is coming from their defense. I think that he's going to catch the limelight and win Coordinator of the Year for Mountain West. That wraps up my projections there. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add in there, but I'm hopeful. I'm excited for this Boise State defense.
I can guarantee you this. If we hold teams under 100 yards rushing, the average for the season, we will go undefeated.
Oh, absolutely. It's a big ask, especially when you play teams like Air Force that just put up 1,000 yards on you. It's a big ask, but the schedule is there.
There's little things, but if we hold people under 100 yards rushing per game for the season, we are going to have a great season, and we could go undefeated. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
That wraps up our predictions, our analysis, our preview of this Boise State 2022 front seven. It has been an awesome conversation, and the video that you all are seeing is shorter than what we even ended up putting out here because I had to edit it down for YouTube. So there is bonus footage out there that I might try to put out in some other format that would blow your mind. This was an incredible discussion. I absolutely had just a blast getting to have this conversation with Carl Keever about a very exciting part of this Boise State 2022 football team. So this is part one. I don't know how many parts we're going to work through, but we're going to preview every single unit for Boise State. So we started off here with the front seven, grouping the linebackers and D lines together. Next, my probable next video is either going to be with Tyler Rosso or with Ryan Dinwiddie. I'm thinking the next one's going to be with Ryan Dinwiddie, and that's going to be a preview of the Boise State quarterback and passing game for the offense. So make sure you watch that video. I'll be releasing my, just like I did for Carl Keever before he came on the channel, I'll be releasing my Ryan Dinwiddie tribute video, career highlight summary. Played a little bit later for Boise State, so there's a lot more footage available. So that video is going to be a little bit longer. I am working to try and get some more footage of Carl Keever. I'm still deep diving in the archives and trying to work with some former coaches. So if I am able to find that, I promise another future Carl Keever tribute video, as well as some more highlight footage as well. So I'll keep working on that. But make sure you watch all the rest of the videos in this series. If you're watching later in the year and the rest are already out, there's a playlist and a link to that playlist in this video, in the remarks section of this video. Go find that. Watch the rest of this. It's a very exciting season for Boise State football. Year 2 for Andy Avalos and this staff. There is a huge potential for Boise State to really do some different things this year, and I think we're all excited to see what that looks like. So thank you so much for watching this video. As always, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you share this content. Make sure you join Bronco Nation Updates on Facebook. Over 10,000 fans across the nation, part of that Facebook group. Carl Keever is a member of that Facebook group as well. So make sure you join that Facebook group. It's a great organization for Boise State fans. Thanks so much for watching this video. Thank you so much, Carl, for being on the show with us today. And as always, go Big Blue.
Fight, BSU.